Now, Professor Musa Xulu joins us now to talk more about today's proceedings. A very good evening to you, Prof. Thank you so much for speaking to us. The burial that we saw today, what was seen and its characterization, was it the same or similar as to what we saw for the late Amazulu King Zwelithini Mangosuthu, ukutshalwa kwenkosi?
No, good evening. No, it was not the same because the ukutshalwa of King Zwelithini Mangosuthu was much stronger on the traditional aspects of it. What happened is that the late king was buried in the middle of the night in a secret ceremony, so that by the time we had a similar event like we had today on a smaller scale, though, the body of the king was not there. But what we saw today was that Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi's body was not interred during the night. It went to the stadium and of course came back, and as the speeches and all the other things were going on, the body was there, and then came back and was buried in the afternoon, albeit in the late afternoon. So it was slightly different.
And I'll come back to the religious aspect of it. But as you said, initially the information was that Nkosi Buthelezi was to be buried on Friday evening. But as you mentioned, we saw the funeral service earlier on Ulundi, which obviously went on up until the late hours of the day. The lack of specificity, how intentional and important is that? Because according to what I remember of when Isilo was buried and the customs and traditions around that, particularly when talking about somebody who was of a royal nature, the secrecy was important. Was this as per Nkosi Buthelezi's wishes, or is it because of the different stations that they occupied?
Well, it could be both. You must remember that Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi was a staunch Anglican Christian. He was a deacon there and a preacher at the church. And the church was very close to his heart. So he would have given instructions to the family about that aspect. And then the second aspect, of course, was the traditional, where it was important that Amakhosi, Amabutho participate in this very important occasion of sending him away, because he was so close to Amakhosi and Amabutho. You know, those are the pillars of the kingdom, of the Zulu kingdom. And then the third element that came, which although was there with His Majesty the King, was not as emphatic as it was today. So all these three elements had to be taken into account, and what we saw today was unique, a kind of negotiated and act of balancing between all these three aspects of his life. Of course, the fourth aspect of his life is that he was a politician. That's why you had so many politicians attending there. So it would have been, I suppose, discussed prior with his family that his wish was for these elements, none of these elements to be left out. And then they were left with having to balance things up, such as that what we saw today. Yes, there was a thinking, and from a cultural aspect, in terms of traditions, as somebody who was so senior in the Zulu kingdom, that he was going to be buried at night, but it was not to be.
And I want to follow his journey, how he lived his life. As you say, Nkosi Buthelezi was a staunch practicing member of the Anglican Church. He spurned even traditional customs, that of being a polygamist, as per the understanding. How was he able to successfully merge and converge what some would say are conflicting aspects of his life, but he obviously found some synergistic way? So what was carried out today and how he lived his life, just talk to us about how that was reflected and how this has also indented culture, particularly AmaZulu culture, because he was a leader and in the position of Prime Minister?
Well, he was a heritageist at heart. The history of Christianization of the Zulu kingdom, the Zulu royal household, started with King Bande in the 1840s and 1850s, when the first missionaries, the second wave of missionaries happened. The first wave had been during the reign of King Dingane. But the bigger wave of Christian missionaries was during the reign of King Bande in the 40s, 1840s, 1850s, and 1860s. And of course, then naturally, the royal household chose the Anglican Church. So he did not choose it for himself. By the time he was born, the relationship between the royal household, the Zulu royal household, and the Anglican Church has been well established. And so eventually, when he was born into it, and his mother had a lot of influence on him, and his grandfather, although he did not see him, King Dinuzulu, was also a very modern traditionalist. So he was, I think, deliberately, Buthelezi was mixing all those things, and he went to school and became the first person in the Zulu royal household to have a university degree, and that actually then catapulted his stature, not only within the royal household, but also within the Zulu nation. And of course, we know as a result of being able to play many roles at the same time, being friendly to the missionaries and the Christian faith, and also being very friendly to the Nazareth Baptist Church, the Shembe Church, which started in Durban, but is now one of the biggest indigenous churches in South Africa. So he was able to go through all of that, and today he would be singing traditional Zulu Mahobo songs at the commemoration of King Shaka Edward Duguza, and the following day he's preaching at his church. So I think it was a special gift for him to be able to put those things together. And the reflection that you saw today was the reflection of the man himself.
And that gift of being a unifier, as was commented on, that his funeral was clearly that of a man, as you mentioned, he was a culturalist, traditionalist, even as a politician, IFP leader. You had the AmaZulu nation coming together to celebrate his life. As history itself naturally evolves, the issue of Isilo Misuzulu not being able to attend his prime minister's funeral because, as we've been told, the king is forbidden by cultural policies that dictate his reign. Was this then not an opportunity to equally be a unifier given recent tensions? Please share your thoughts on this line of thinking.
Well, the recent tensions were and continue to be very unfortunate. When it all started late in March, early April, we the analysts could see that there was going to be a problem. And of course, there was a problem till the end, because at the end of his life, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi and His Majesty the King were not in talking terms. However, on the issue of His Majesty attending the funeral, no, they don't. The Zulu kings don't attend funerals. They don't go anywhere near any death because of traditional beliefs that, when there's many people in a funeral, evil spirits could be roaming around and could maybe also enter the king and weaken him, and therefore weaken the kingdom. They usually get represented by somebody else from the royal family. Or a delegation that is identified as such, as representing His Majesty. Then later, after the mourning period, His Majesty can go to the Buthelezi family. But for now, it was not going to happen today. And that's why it didn't happen. I don't think anybody got worried about it. I know what you mean when you say maybe if His Majesty had been there and maybe, give a speech, it would have been seen as some kind of, looking up to reconciliation. I think they will have to follow traditions now in terms of looking at how to reconcile.
And speaking of following traditions, in 1972, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, the KwaZulu Constitution, and where it vested executive powers, we saw Nkosi Buthelezi, according to those who judge history, actually netting a huge cue from this, that the king largely became that of a ceremonial role. You mentioned the role that he played as a political leader. So in the event that the prime minister is chosen, the pedigree of that person who's to succeed in Nkosi Buthelezi, what kind of qualities would they be looking for? You spoke about Nkosi Buthelezi being a change maker, trailblazer in certain aspects. Would this king be expected to balance the modernist aspect very well as political astuteness?
Yeah, well, look, let me start with the 1972 aspect of it. The last Zulu king really who had all original powers was King Cetshwayo. After the defeat of the Zulus in the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879, Zulu kings by and large became ceremonial, and the colonial and apartheid governments actually did not refer to them as kings. They were called paramount chief. Paramount Chief, that title is a title that Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, through KwaZulu government, removed from His Majesty the late King Zwelithini and called him king. It was he who actually restored the title. So, and of course, the KwaZulu government, KwaZulu Homeland government was able to support materially the royal household, which had not been possible before 1971-72. In terms of getting a replacement, there's going to be a lot of pressure. Maybe one of the mistakes that His Majesty will make is to try to get a Buthelezi. Now, that possibly will not be possible. So what needs to happen now is a sitting down to look at the profile and maybe kind of job description and expectations of what role is the post-Buthelezi traditional prime minister going to play, and then look for a person who will fit that description. At my level, I can only say the person must be quite knowledgeable about Zulu history, Zulu tradition, cultural heritage, and be able also to understand how government works, how society works, and the role of traditional leaders in the structures of the Zulu kingdom. We must remember that His Majesty the King does not rule alone. It's a federal kingdom with several structures which make, when they are fully functional, then the kingdom becomes very strong. But when these structures are not fully functional, you can expect that the kingdom will be quite sick. So it's a big ask, but I can't say one person being able to emulate Buthelezi, because as you say, as I say, as you say, as everybody says, Buthelezi had experiences which maybe are not to be found today.
Professor Musa Xulu, as always, thank you very much for your time and insights. And of course, we'll continue this conversation, look at who are emerging as a contenders, also look at their historical background against that of Nkosi Buthelezi. And of course, some of the debates surrounding his lineage that have been mentioned in the past, as we've heard and seen, debate around his own legacy, that of Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi.